introduction and yeah, for taking care of all these wonderful things. And thank you all for making the time and being here either right now, tonight for my time, at least here in Europe, or yeah, while watching the recording. And we just want to start off with a few questions just to get you in the right mindset. So I assume that most of you or all of you are developmental scientists, and you can just think about what are the issues that we're facing in the field and how can ManyBabies help address these issues. To go a bit more into ManyBabies, what is the goal, or what are the goals of ManyBabies? Early on, already 7 years ago, there was a paper published by a bunch of us that outlined the vision for ManyBabies and also formulated some goals. We can also always look back to that paper. I think that's still holding up pretty well, actually. So yeah, one is, of course, key findings that we're building our theory and our field on. Are they replicable? Are we building on solid ground? If findings sometimes come out as significant, sometimes not, why is that the case? And can we also agree on a certain way to do things? And usually ManyBaby studies are not exact replications because we go with the times, we adapt, we update, we need to change a few things to make studies globally possible, to really say it that way. And so it's actually very rare that we do an exact replication. So how do we choose the findings we study in ManyBabies? They should be really theoretically central. It should be a finding that is being discussed in literature. It should be feasible. So it shouldn't involve very expensive technology for the main study. It shouldn't be very lengthy. So a study that starts at birth and goes on for 10 years might be a bit difficult, but of course I don't want to limit your imagination here. And it should have opportunities for progress beyond replication. So there's this nice graph on a study that has been studied in replication that is not from the developmental science, but that shows that we can learn a lot and there's a lot of variability, even if we do it in a standardized way. And I'll just jump on. And so here's the history of ManyBabies. This is really, really exciting because it made me realize that we're turning 10 next year. It's been a long time. In 2015, the discussions started, the conversations started. There were different events, papers published, everything just came together and it was just time for ManyBabies, basically. I was there quite early, so I feel like I've seen it from infancy, and it was really a cool time to see this project evolve. But of course, if you're just getting into it, it's still not too late. The project is still growing. So 2015 it started. And how did we choose the first ManyBaby study? There was actually a vote. So people nominated studies that they thought meet the criteria of being feasible and central. And you see here the votes. So 27 researchers voted. And the winner was the preference for infant-directed speech, which then became ManyBabies 1. If you have been into ManyBabies, you'll see that a few other of these papers actually have been picked up by other ManyBabies projects. So it's not like the choice for infant-directed speech preference as first project eliminated any of the other options. Yeah, and of course, that's really, it's what are we excited about doing? This should be something that we're also willing to invest our resources in and not something that we think doesn't work anyway. So ManyBabies 1 had I think it was a great success. It had a lot of contributors, 149 from 86 institutions. There's this wonderful map on the ManyBabies website that you can explore, can zoom in and out. We even nominated the most remote labs and gave prizes for that at one point. So we do cover the globe quite well, I think. Well, of course, you'll notice that 2 continents are missing. But I think still it's different from other replication projects that I've seen, and it's really, yeah, a resounding success, I think. So what happened after the first project, or what happened with the first project? So this project started 2016, and in the same year, actually, the second ManyBabies project started as well. There was also an idea for a third one, and the fourth ManyBabies project also got started. The third one was adapted a bit in 2018, and then in 2019, there were 4 projects already running in different stages. Some were already collecting data, some were in the design phase. These projects all move at different paces. We issued a call for contributions with a template for submitting new proposals because we wanted to also broaden participation and invite people with new ideas, new approaches to contribute to ManyBabies. And that led to ManyBabies 5 and a few other submissions that we gave feedback on to ensure feasibility, and that are still somewhere in the pipeline, I hope. But it also led to ManyBabies at Home later on. You will notice that 2020 was a very interesting time for us. So looking at online testing was very, very smart, I think, in 2020. And we also got a methodological project with ManyBabies demographic, which looks at how we actually capture in a global way the characteristics of our populations. The online theme continues in 2021 to surprise of everyone with many webcams where we compare, or where online measures and lab measures are compared. And the latest addition is ManyBabies 6, neonatal and early imitation. You might have seen those pictures where parents stick their tongue out at their newborn and baby does it back. So this is where we are right now. ManyBabies 1 is completed, and the others are at various stages of progress, from writing up the final report to starting data collection to designing the study in the case of ManyBabies 6. So how do we move on from here? So these are the ManyBaby contributors at large. Casey, do you want to hop in? Because we thought we'll share duties here.
Sure, yes. This is our arbitrary decision point where I take over. Christina, thank you so much. And it's so wonderful to see everybody. It'd be wonderful to get everyone talking in a very natural way in a few minutes, including introducing yourself when you do. But now, as you can see on this slide, there's only 2 or 3 slides remaining, by the way. We have 670 contributors in ManyBabies who span every career stage you can think of, spanning 6 of 7 continents now. We're still missing Antarctica. Spanning 270 institutions, which is really remarkable. So it's been a pretty amazing 9 years since the birth of ManyBabies in the Reading Terminal Market in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, which is where the ideas were first floated. And Christina, if you could advance the slides for me, that'd be great. The next slide possibly show. Whoop. We lost it, Christina.
That was completely my fault, and I will just stop sharing and restart the presentation, because that's what happens when you have people at their nighttime. No, it's not that late here.
But thank you for anybody who's here in non-standard work hours. It's very kind of you.
Yes.
I hope this is not interrupting your life too much. And are you about to reshare, Christina?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Once I wanted to jump into the right slide.
Thanks. Well, I'll start describing it anyway, and then you'll see a visualization of it shortly. So this slide is overviewing what makes ManyBabies unique in our opinion and what it's adding to the field. And we landed on 4 ways we can describe its uniqueness. One is it brings together key tests of theory and methodological development. We've been building a consensus-based model for deciding how things should progress with ManyBabies. And this has largely meant we do best test versions of experiment designs. It doesn't mean we replicate one exact paper, but we engage in best test thinking collaboratively. This is the purple box, as you see here. We've been able to explicitly study different methods of data collection. For example, in ManyBabies 1, we could compare a few different ways of examining looking time and attention, which hopefully yielded some interesting results that will apply to other projects, but perhaps they won't. And I'd say in doing so, we're landing on some methodological innovation that's pretty special too. We I'll skip the blue one. It's about consensus-based best practices, but we've been exploring how to do this, and in the meantime, generating a community of really wonderful new friends and scientists. And I think anybody who's engaged in ManyBabies finds it to be very supportive. Infant scientists are the best scientists, and I think you find friends wherever you look, and you can learn so much. The framework we've adopted over time is, as we're framing it here, radically collaborative and very horizontal. It's an opportunity to rethink the reward structures in academia. For those of you who question whether engagement with the ManyBabies project is worth your time, we just hope it is for various reasons, even if you're not first or last author, as our field so stupidly seems to prioritize. That is very much against the spirit of just broad participation in a project. So via minimal time investment, sometimes you can, be on a paper, and that's good for many careers, but also maybe this is just a way to learn what you actually want to learn about science and apply it to your own work in meaningful ways. There are many ways to contribute. Data collection is not required, and we provide opportunities for truly anyone to take on some kind of lead role. You can trust me, right, as somebody who's involved in ManyBabies 5, along with Jessica Cosi and Martin Zettersten, that we welcome meaningful contributions from people who want to be on different sub-teams and take the lead with stimulus design or power analyses and all sorts of things. So anybody, anywhere can express that interest, and there is a way to take on a leadership role. Trust me, each project is interested in that. Lastly, ManyBabies allows for many spin-off projects. That was especially fruitful with ManyBabies 1, and several other spin-off projects have happened since. So for people who have particular focused interests in a particular population or aspect of the design, spin-off projects with, say, 5 to 15 collaborators have been a very common model. And this allows us to make use of these very high-value data sets. Yep, next slide is great, Christina. So a few challenges we still continue to face, these are each so sizable. One is diversity on all levels, most saliently in leadership and contributions and project selection. So I'd love to talk about that. That's one of our discussion questions for today. Funding is also very hard. We don't fit the mold of most grant applications, but we've been trying with occasional successes. And we have thoughts on that too, if anybody wants to chat about that. Our Canadian colleagues have been making amazing efforts, especially led by Kylie Hamlin, to try to get some broad funding for ManyBabies. And we hope that's successful in the end. And then third is ethics. How not only do we get ethics approval in various places around the country, around the world, but how do we share data in a consortium like this? It's hard, especially in some nations. So when we have video-based data, that makes sharing very hard. So this is something that we struggle with, that other Many's sort of projects in many fields in academia struggle with, but we are no exception. So those were our slides. The next one, I think we'll just keep it up and present for the duration of the conversation, because these are the questions we thought of to guide our discussion. We'd love to hear from anybody who is new, from anybody who's just getting into this, from anyone who might find ManyBabies to be different from what they thought it might be, for somebody who has off-the-wall weird ideas for what it could be in the future. That's very welcome. We're boxed into this way of thinking about what ManyBabies is, but it's time for its next steps. And this town hall is to collect ideas about what those next steps could be. So there are 5 questions here. I don't want to be too regimented in how we go through them, but let's go ahead and be regimented in how we go through them. We'll start with the first question. And really just pipe up, and anybody's welcome. And you can take time to think of what you want to say and ask it in 20 minutes. That's fine. And we'll wrap up 40 minutes from now when we hit the hour mark. So the first question, feel free to read the rest yourself, but where should ManyBabies go next in terms of individual projects or overall directions? This is an open question here about what you think could come next, broadly defined. It could be a phenomenon you're interested in, right? And it could be a kind of conceptual idea for what could come next with ManyBabies. Good idea.
Yeah, thanks. I'll just jump in and say thanks, Christine and Casey, for that great overview. I've gone ahead and pasted these topics into the shared notes document that I've put in a link to in the chat so everyone can see it. We can, maybe that way we'll be able to take the, we can stop sharing the screen so that we can see each other and have a open discussion. And people, please feel free to jump in on any of these topics, or if you came here today with something specific that you wanted to either contribute or pose a question to the group, that's welcome as well. So maybe let's use the raise hand emoji so that there's kind of like a queue so that it's easy to go through. If people are shy, then we have multiple members of the governing board here. We can sort of share some of the discussions that we've had in our meetings about some of these topics, but really we'd love to hear from all of you who came today if you have any thoughts on any of these topics. And you can also use the chat as well. Is anyone brave and wants to get us started on anything?
Please do. It's about next steps for projects or overall directions. Amy.
Hi, I have a question. I'm brand new to ManyBabies. I've just recently come across this. This is my first group. So I'm wondering whether the data set includes children who have disabilities, or if they've been excluded, or if there's room to explore that as a topic area.
It's a really interesting topic. I can jump in, and others obviously feel free to jump in. I think this is getting at a really interesting issue in developmental science as a whole. We have these traditions in the field of excluding participants, right? Who are X, who are Y, who are Z, who are A, who are B. And that is both good for getting a homogeneous sample, also bad for not capturing what we all truly care about, which is representation, right? Or variability in ways that matter. Of course, it's hard to make conclusions when you don't have a robust sample of a particular population, but I do think we should all be questioning this tendency to, exclude premature, exclude bilingual, exclude suspicions of delays or disabilities, right? If it's a vision impairment, for example, and it's a vision-based study, I think we have to, right? But I err on the side of inclusion myself and trying to rethink some of these field standards. And that has not been the case for every ManyBabies project necessarily, though. So I definitely can say with confidence, this is ripe for a spin-off project. If there's a swell of even a few labs that want to pool resources and do a study with a particular population for whatever the motivation, that would be fantastic. So I'll stop there. Others can chime in.
Yeah, I'd like to add to that, which is that we have at times talked about having a broader inclusion in terms of the data that are collected, because it seems like a missed opportunity in the sense of you have smaller populations that, individual labs would really struggle to get a sample. But if we're inclusive in the data collection that we're doing for the studies that we have, and then you have that, that opportunity to collect, say, preterm infants, you might have an analysis that is excluding preterm infants, but then you actually have a subsample of preterm infants that is then part of the larger project. And we've talked about that at a couple different points, and it never sort of became a normative practice that we instituted, but I've sort of at different points along the way, I've thought that might be something that we could start to implement as sort of more normative within the discussion about how we address those things. But it's, yeah. So I think it's, there's the idea of doing it as sort of a separate study, and then there's the idea of sort of being more inclusive in the way that we design the studies in the first place. And I think those are two different approaches.
Let me just quickly jump into one aspect of your question, namely whether children that we would normally exclude are in the dataset. And if I remember correctly, in the ManyBabies 1 dataset, which is the one that's like nicely wrapped up and available on GitHub, I do remember that at least a bunch of babies were excluded based on these pre-registered criteria of what is typical. So at least for a small number of samples, you could already go into existing data and maybe extrapolate from the data we have there, and maybe see what you get. And I also saw that in some countries you can't actually screen out babies. So you would collect any baby that comes into the lab, and then if you notice that, oh, they happen to have a cochlear implant, then you would take a note or something. So it's about gathering medical information, which is different, which is regulated differently in different places. So yeah, we both don't know and have some. So it's really, it's an interesting problem that we could definitely expand on, or not problem, issue, topic.
Amy, would you also mind just introducing yourself for a minute, just so we all can get to know each other a bit?
Sure. Amy Sarkowski. I work with children who are deaf and hard of hearing as my primary interest, but children with disabilities broadly. I'm in the Boston area. I'm at Boston Children's Hospital, Harvard Medical School, and University of Massachusetts, Boston.
Amazing, thank you. Well, others do want to chime in about individual projects or overall directions for ManyBabies that are on your mind. Martin, of course, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Martin. For those who don't know me, I'm a postdoc at still a postdoc at Princeton University. Going to be moving to UCSD here in a couple months. Yeah, so I've talked with a few folks about this already, but just in the interest of getting conversation going, I think one thing on my mind is that like we have this huge network of folks who are really interested in contributing to ManyBabies, have contributed in some format, and there's a ton of enthusiasm still in the larger community. And then I think my subjective impression, due to, you know, limitations of my own ability to move some of these projects forward, you then kind of have this issue that like you get people excited and then you hit the reality of the pace of a lot of these projects, which is many years, right? So so I guess two questions are sort of related to this. One is sort of a thornier question that I don't quite know how to answer, which is like, how do we think about the pace of these projects and what we can do to improve there? Sort of more a question for myself. But the other question I've been sort of thinking about is how can we make use of the fact that there is this great network there of folks who are ready to recruit babies, are interested in collecting data. Are there other ways that we can kind of, leverage, you know, the network that we've already built for kind of lower hanging fruit kind of projects? So to make this a little bit more concrete, you know, one like concrete idea is trying to collect larger scale survey data for, you know, some key kind of questions within the field. We now have, you know, so many researchers around the world who in principle, I think would be willing to engage in that kind of work where there's like a little bit less, I mean, not saying that there wouldn't be a lot to figure out there, but just thinking about, you know, kind of what some lower hanging fruit kind of projects might be for the consortium that don't involve, you know, kind of the most exciting, but also most like time intensive and costly activity, which is, you know, physically bringing babies into the lab after painstakingly designing, you know, a new experiment with the consensus of the community. I'll stop there, but I'd be really curious to see if that sparks any other thoughts from folks.
I want to jump right in because I've just today attended a really interesting talk by the Norwegian Reproducibility Network, which was a great coincidence. And there was a really nice comparison of different ways of doing these big team science projects. So we take a long time also because we do a lot of things consensus-based. So if we, as you suggest, take something that's already pretty well thought out, or if we basically have a small consortium that makes decisions and then just say, this is what you can take. You can sign on, you don't have to, of course, but this is the design. That would, of course, greatly speed up things. And other projects have done it like that. So it's more like what it was called like, assigned research, so like more an assignment. You take up an assignment and then just do your little part. And why shouldn't we explore these different ways maybe. I think it's actually an interesting point to make that, yes, we have a lot of democracy, but that at the cost of time, which also disadvantages people. I think that's a really good point that you're making there.
I have a one sentence reply, which is, I think we need to more strongly acknowledge that these projects take 4 to 5 years. They just take more time, I think, than we initially thought. That's all. And so I think that's a reality that's proven to be true.
Oh, Martin just asked in the chat, do you want to say it loud? Because I think you should just say it.
Yeah,
Like,
totally. Yeah, I guess like a different way of putting this, right, would be like, we have kind of like a main product that we're kind of developing that is our, bread and butter of what we do. And I guess the spin-off projects and some of the like demographics projects and other, so there's already kind of a diverse portfolio there of different kinds of projects. But I think, I don't know, what would be interesting to me would be to continue to kind of think about what other kinds of projects we might be able to build in the context of the network. And maybe those could be even longer timeline, right? Like pushing back against myself, right? Like we're not doing any, well, we've kind of dabbled in longitudinal stuff a little bit so far, but you could kind of think about, even more ambitious stuff if one wanted to. So I'm just thinking diversify the portfolio is kind of the header.
Yeah, that's great. I'm gonna sort of jump on that comment to pose sort of the next topic, which is also one of the reasons why we decided to hold these town halls. So we were talking within the governing board of, oh, it seems like it's about time to start thinking about what our next project is going to be. What is ManyBabies 7? It's been a couple of years since we launched a new project, and we really wanted to get the community's input, or start, see if there are ways to think outside the box of how we've done things in the past about what our next project or set of projects should be. And yeah, it doesn't necessarily need to be sort of a straightforward empirical project like MBs 1 through 6 have been. It could be something, where we're more methodologically focused, or sort of a multiverse type study where we're testing, a bunch of different things under the same umbrella. But really, we wanted to see if anybody had any creative ideas, both on what those projects could be, and also sort of what the process should be for soliciting those ideas, making sure that we're bringing in new voices and not just, this same small group of people making the decisions for this like ever-growing and diverse network. So if anybody has any thoughts on that, we'd love to hear them. Yeah, Sherry, go ahead.
Hello. I think that I would definitely support either like a replication project as the next project or a methodological one. And I was just trying to think to myself, like, what are the big questions or the big, let's say, assumptions that we have in testing babies that, sometimes feel ritualistic, and I don't know whether it's actually true. And one thing that I have thought about is to what extent parents can really influence their baby's looking behavior. And we ran into this when we tested babies online, and some of us were not comfortable asking parents to close their eyes because anything could be happening. And it kind of got me interested in just asking. A lot of us tell caregivers to close their eyes or disengage, but how possible really is it for an adult to influence their baby's looking? And it's interesting because it could be folded into another project as a thing that gets manipulated on the side.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic. Do get in touch with the folks from ManyBabies at Home, because I do think this one would be a perfect candidate for this kind of manipulation. Yeah, because some labs, yeah, put headphones on, some let's put yeah, eye masks on, some let's do both, right? And then some at home instruct to go away, etc. So I think this is something, yeah, that's ripe. It's a fantastic idea that would have really far-reaching consequences. Either way.
Related to that, I'm also interested in the methods, and I'm curious about retesting a baby. So let's say you need to take a break and test again with the same stimuli, how much they remember from one day to another, from half an hour to an hour. I'm curious if how much effect this this has, and usually I notice that we choose to not retest the baby, to stop immediately and not try again the task. So I wonder about this too.
Yeah, excellent point. I'm just following along in the chat. So Ricky asked a great question about sort of the current process. Melanie linked to a proposal form that's sort of the form that was sent out in the last call for proposals, which I think Christina mentioned happened in 2019. And then so that's how MB5 came about, through that process. MB6, a team submitted a proposal using that form, but that wasn't in response to a wide call. So yeah, one of our questions is, do we just sort of do a big publicity tour where we promote that form and ask people to submit proposals? Should we do another survey where we ask people what topics or things they're interested in? Or should we more do a targeted solicitation to new folks who are doing work outside of the topics or areas that we've already covered? Those are the types of things we're thinking about. Anyone else want to weigh in on this topic, or we can always go to some of the other, again, happy to have people weigh in on any of the topics that are listed as those sort of discussion topics that we introduced at the end of the intro, or really anything else on your mind. Or if you have any questions for the folks who have, been here since the beginning. We've got a lot of great minds here: Christina, Mike, Casey, Melanie, Kylie, Brianna, and others who have been very involved since the beginning of ManyBabies.
And if you have a great idea tomorrow morning during your coffee or tea time, do send it in. It's like, this is not it. This is just the first town hall and the first step. So yeah, Heidi's inbox is open. Sorry, Heidi.
My inbox is open. I'll also we created a form for people to be able to submit ideas, like if they were unable to attend these town halls, but of course that's open to everyone. And before I call on Martin, who has his hand raised, I will just say, we're having another one of these town halls later this week for people, in other time zones. Everyone's welcome at that. And these are all in run up to the pre-conference workshop that we'll be holding at ICUS in July. So if anybody is going to be attending ICUS and you want to join us there, we'll be continuing this discussion as well. So with that, Martin, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. Somebody stop me if there's other questions that come up, because I've talked enough already. But just while we're on the topic of choosing projects anyway, I'd be just really curious to hear how the governing board has been thinking about what direction you want ManyBabies to go in. I'll try and caricature a couple of directions just to make it sort of more grounded. So you could imagine, we follow this trajectory where basically we try to replicate, basically child development textbook projects one after the other. And we kind of build up this incredible data set, kind of regrounding, the what we think of as the core child development literature or something like that. That seems like one like really ambitious way to continue the ManyBabies process that would be sort of consistent with the trajectory that I see right now. A different like kind of direction or rethinking of like what we're up to would be, and we try to do this a little bit in ManyBabies 5 to kind of like pick out not like a specific experiment or specific finding necessarily to replicate, but to kind of take sort of start with the theoretical model or the theoretical idea, and then think about, you know, different ways that we might develop a kind of core test of that. I mean, I think ManyBabies 5 kind of straddles these two conceptions that I'm describing. It's not really all that novel or anything, but you could imagine going in more novel kind of directions. A different way of thinking about this might be in terms of like how folks want to think about balancing risk and the risk of different projects, right? So do we, when choosing projects, how much do we want to think about, you know, testing stuff like IDS preference, where we were pretty confident that it should replicate, versus stuff that's kind of more risky or more novel? I don't know. Anything that seems kind of interesting from there? I'd just be really curious to hear how the governing board has been thinking about that.
Yeah, Mike, go ahead.
Yeah, so I don't think I could speak for the governing board here. I'll just say for myself, when we began thinking about ManyBabies, we were in kind of an early phase of discussions around replication and meta-science. And the approach that people were taking was really to get the largest scale possible to estimate some experimental effect. And that strategy has many strengths, but also some significant weaknesses. So one of the weaknesses is that individual point estimates are not sufficient for theory building. You really need to have variation across conditions and across you know, other salient units that we care about. For example, kind of cultures or populations or contexts, or age, or, you know, other kind of sociodemographic variables. So an increased emphasis on variation and sampling to measure variation, I think, is very important. And a second thing is recognizing that you know, we can calibrate the level of precision we need to the question we're interested in. You know, more is sometimes better, but not always better. In our first ManyBabies grant, it was an NSF grant and it was rejected, and I feel sad that it was rejected still. But one of the reviewers wrote something that I was mad about at the time that I think was probably right. They said, you know, you're doing a lot of work here to take a measure that's fundamentally really noisy and get enough power to measure anything. You know, an alternate route is to measure better with fewer kids. Have you thought about that? And I said, no, we have this approach. It's good. Look at, see, it's working. And, you know, in the past 6, 7 years, I've been more interested in measurement. So that's all to say, I think that a more nuanced approach than choosing, you know, only mega projects with kind of one key experimental effect is possibly important. ManyBabies 5 is a great example of that, where there is a design that has condition and age crossed in really important ways that were not possible. So I think we could really move in that direction. But the last piece I'll say, sorry, this is long, is that as a governing board, we are not, you know, we set some kind of general strategy and have interests, but the real driver is the energy of individuals that want to do projects that have a certain kind of layout. And so to the extent that there are folks that say, oh, a theoretically relevant question with a bunch of manipulations or measurement of variability on some interesting dimension, like that's, then we can try to help and apply some of the team science approaches that we've honed over the past 10 years and that we have some experience with, and help to move that project forward. But we really require folks with energy and specific theoretical interests. Some of those could be in the governing board, but many of them should be from outside of it.
I guess I'm next. I want to respond to that as well. I think that there's I think that there's been this sort of tension, isn't quite the right word, but two motives that have interleaved throughout the almost 10 years that we've been doing this, which is about finding answers to very specific questions of theory, versus kind of honing the methods that we're actually using to be able to better test questions in the future. And I think we've sort of made progress on both of these in some ways. And but I think sometimes the way that we think about designing studies, we could put more thought into how to make that more productive for each project. So an example is, going back to the, looking back at our existing data sets, we haven't really leveraged nearly well enough the existing data sets that we actually have for secondary analyses. And I think that sometimes decisions that we make around things like recruitment and design, we could take that into account a little bit better in order to make those data sets more robustly useful in the long term, because there is such a huge investment on each data set. Looking at different populations, I think is one of the things that we could be more thoughtful about, even in our design to harp on an issue. But I think the other thing that's sort of come out of the last few projects that it's sort of time to take a step back and reflect on, and I'd love to hear what people think going forward in these discussions, is how to take the data that we have in terms of to frame it really narrowly, like the successes and failures of the major projects, and what that tells us or doesn't tell us about broader questions. And one of the things that I think is most striking is kind of this tension between finding what is the effect size, this one little number that we get out of the thousands of babies, versus what can we think about individual differences and variability across the sample. And we've focused a lot more on the former and not so much on the latter. Yeah.
Yeah, great point. So looking in the chat, I agreed that, reuse of these data sets, there's a ton of opportunity there. All of our data sets, well, at this point, it's really the MB1 and the completed studies. All of the data sets are publicly available on OSF primarily, and linked to GitHub repositories that show, also all of the analysis code is available. But, for depending on your comfort with dealing with that, it can be a little difficult to navigate. So improving the organization of that is on our to-do list always. And we also have a great software engineer / I don't know how they would be classified, but working on a visualization tool to help make it easier to access and visualize the data from our projects. But if people have sort of thoughts on what would be useful to them, or what format you would like that data to be in, or what tools you would like, please let us know, because we really want that data to be available for reuse and for teaching purposes. I've heard a number of people use our data sets for teaching purposes, which is really great. So yeah, if you have questions about that, please get in touch.
Well, I suppose we could move to other questions, like we were wondering in the remaining 11 minutes we have about how to best include scientists from underrepresented communities. This is an ongoing effort that's done on a project-specific basis. But if anybody has ideas about that, I'd love to hear from you for a few minutes. And as you ponder that, it would also just be great, as we're wrapping up in 10 minutes or so, what have you personally gotten from your engagement with ManyBabies? And what else might you want to get from it? That's something we're trying to understand better at this stage, and we can really put our heads together about at the ICUS pre-conference, if anybody's going to be there. But either of those questions is fair game, I think, in our remaining time. How can we best include scientists from communities that we're not yet reaching or kind of respecting enough? And then what have you gotten out of ManyBabies so far?
Yeah, great. And I'll also say, if anyone would like us, is waiting until we stop the recording to make a comment, let us know and we can switch to that mode as well. And we'll just keep recording for now.
Awkwardly long pause. Okay, I guess
Yep.
don't yet. But feel free to pipe
Maybe
up. Any ideas for
I'll
reaching?
pose.
Go ahead, Heidi.
Oh, go ahead. No, Casey, go ahead.
Any ideas for reaching scientists who we've not yet been able to reach? And this is not just for including in ideas generated by our normal process, but from learning from each other about approaches and research questions and thinking of questions that can come from underrepresented places in the world. Any ideas about this?
Could I maybe ask a question? I was wondering what has been done so far to reach, underrepresented researchers. Can you explain a little bit about that?
Yeah, broad calls via email, word of mouth, recruitment. I think that's actually been a pretty major source of kind of the spreading of what ManyBabies is trying to do. And also in some cases, talking to folks who represent, to be honest, kind of an entire continent because of where they're located and asking them, do they know anybody who might be interested? And then we've reached out to folks that we might have not otherwise been in contact with in our normal conference circuit. And that's been one means of finding more people who might be interested. Although we've not gotten to the stage of generating research questions from underrepresented universities and nations. And I would love for that to be a future direction of this consortium. Kylie.
Thanks. Yeah, just to respond to that in particular, one of the things that we recently got primary approval for quite a large grant. And one of the line items in that grant will be sort of actually having like regional representatives who get some amount of money to specifically do that. Because I think we all know that like word of mouth only goes as far as mouths that generally chat with each other. And so doesn't necessarily do what we hope it does. I mean, it might do more than nothing, but it might be only a little bit more. So anyway, if we get this very large grant funded and we've gotten through the hardest step of that, we're told at least, then that will be something that we will have actual resources to dedicate to, as opposed to just sort of a lot of good intention, which has been our practice thus far.
Yeah, the funding is just a huge piece of this that the reality is that we don't have, we really rely on volunteer efforts for contributions, both with data collection and just time. All of you who have participated in studies are not getting compensated for it. And so the people who are well resourced tend to be the ones who are able to volunteer those efforts. And so it's kind of, we're in this really difficult place where we want to expand our reach and empower folks to serve in leadership positions, while at the same time we don't, we're scraping, we don't have a way to compensate those efforts. So it's really difficult to ask folks to get involved in these projects when we're not able to compensate them. So things like this Canadian Partnership Grant are one way that we can do that. But again, if people sort of have creative ideas for how we could sort of attempt to do some get funding for these efforts, we're always happy to hear those ideas, because that it's just a reality of the situation.
Let me just chime in. I think there's a forum even where we're collecting possible funding schemes. And if you think, oh, this is a funding scheme that is interesting, we have a lot of hands on deck. So writing a proposal, reviewing it, fine-tuning it, if you're willing to share your proposal, even just for feedback, I think you'll find a lot of help in that community. This is part of open science, right? We're open to helping.
Yeah, and we also, I mean, creative ideas are welcome as well. You know, we've partnered with a fiscal host, a nonprofit fiscal host, where we can receive donations. So it doesn't necessarily have to be through traditional, you know, government funding sources. We can, if you have ideas on, you know, ways that we can get a little here, a little there, it could go a long way in helping us achieve these goals. We only have a few minutes left. Does anybody have has been, you know, waiting to chime in with a topic, either something we've already talked about or just some thoughts? Again, thoughts on the incentives of participating in our projects, either incentives or impediments, or really anything else. But oh, two hands at once. I love it. Suzanne, please go ahead.
Hi, thanks for having me here. This has been very, very interesting. I was just looking at the document again. So I've also been struggling with ethics applications to share video data, especially with the infants, of course. And I was wondering, maybe for future projects or even past projects that had video recordings, so some labs may have had ethical approval to keep the video recordings, you know, to their own institution, but not to share it more widely. And I was wondering if maybe there's something there to explore with regards to secondary data analysis. So that way you would kind of maybe formulate a new question and bring back the labs, like the original labs, to investigate this question in their data. And they could then share numerical data instead of videos. Does that make sense? This is coming from someone who's very interested in nonverbal behavior, which I often think is a little bit overlooked. So video data is like one of my main resources for investigating questions about caregiver and infant interactions or similar things. Yeah.
I want to quickly jump in and point you to a paper that I think came out of exactly this issue in ManyBabies at Home, which is webcam based. So by necessity, it's video based, and by necessity, you need sharing because you can't burden a lab with both data connection and annotation. And they basically developed a tool that scrambles the facial features to anonymize video data. So I think it's been published recently. And it looks really cool. So it's an ongoing issue, but yeah, the sharing of videos, I think a number of our projects have worked with that. So Kylie's of course an expert now.
Yeah, so yes, MB4, they developed a scheme where labs sort of formed a bilateral agreement with the University of British Columbia to be able to share their videos directly with them. But I love this idea of asking labs to do some additional coding of the videos that they have access to. So I know there was one undergraduate who did a thesis on where she looked at all of the videos that were available from MB1, and she did some coding of the infant's behavior during the MB1 task. But yeah, I don't think anybody has systematically asked all of the, you know, come up with a question to ask all of the labs to sort of go back and look at their own video data to code new behaviors. That's a really great idea and possibility for spin-off projects from all of our projects. And so if you have an idea like that, that's a really great opportunity to propose something to either a specific project leadership team or to the network at large to see if there's interest there. But that's a really great idea for how to get more use out of these really rich data sets in a way that also doesn't require onerous sharing permissions. Teresa, did you also have a question?
I just had a couple of things to add. I'm at a small university in Texas, in San Antonio, Texas, and even though I'm in the middle of the city, I had a lot of trouble. I was on MB4, and I had a lot of trouble recruiting. And but I want to also point out that that's one of the benefits of doing the ManyBabies, is especially at universities where we have a really high teaching load. It's so hard to be able to run an entire study by ourselves. And it took me like 6 or 7 years to do an EEG study with babies. And then, of course, you know, the data doesn't work. So that's one of the things I wanted to point out is the benefits to these small teaching universities and the people who are trying to do infant research there. As for topics, I was wondering if face perception or even the preferential looking technique has come up as a discussion for possible future projects.
I'd love to comment on the first point, Teresa. I really appreciate you saying that. It really warms my heart. I think it's so important to think of the best pathways toward making this feasible for people who have high teaching loads. I would love to talk to you more about how we can like make this a kind of minimal burden on implementation. So thank you for that really important perspective. I'll let somebody else cover part 2. Face perception. If anybody has thoughts, we've not studied it.
Yeah, I think it certainly would be a topic that there's a ton of interest in and would love to see a proposal for that. And the preferential looking, I mean, the MB5 project, it's not, you know, a looking while listening per se, but it is sort of a preferential looking between 2 items. But I think, again, some of these topics that we talked about before, where it could be both a test of an empirical question as well as an investigation of like a very commonly used method that isn't perhaps has never been systematically tested or explored, could be really interesting to do, sort of take advantage of our large network and explore some of these things at the same time. So really, really great idea. Love to discuss that further. All right, we've come up at time and it looks like most of our group has had to run to other things, but I just really want to thank you all for making the time to come and engage in this discussion. This has been really great. This is just the start of sort of a string of these discussions. And we hope that you'll stay engaged and help us chart the future of ManyBabies. So with that, we can end today and we'll see you at the next ManyBabies event. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Heidi.